so thanks again. In the U.S., Women's History Month traces its beginnings back to the first International Women's Day, which was in 1911. And in 1987, a petition passed by Congress designated the month of March as Women's History Month. And in March, it's celebrated in the U.S., the UK, and Australia, and in October in Canada. The impact of women's history might seem abstract to some and less pressing than the immediate struggles of all of us working women today, but we can't ignore the vital role that women's accomplishments play in our lives. It's really never more present than in the political arena, where it's probably even harder to be a woman than it is at DLAPiper in a law firm across the country. So we really draw on the strength and inspiration from those who came before us and those who come with us today, present, and in the future. We're so proud to have Quinn with us here tonight. We so greatly appreciate her being here, given her crazy, crazy schedule. So O'Brien and I serve on one of Chris's finance committees, and O'Brien Kelly's going to introduce her. Thanks again.
Take my notes. We're, of course, thrilled also for the LGBT Lawyers Affinity Group to welcome you here today, especially when we scheduled this. We did not know that 3 other very strong female lawyers would, how do I put this, pester the crap out of those who would like to nullify our relationships. And so it's fortuitous that we get to say on this day, welcome. I've been fortunate enough to know Quinn for a long time. I served on a board of a nonprofit with her amazing wife, Kim Catullo, and got to know her that way, and then have obviously been a big supporter. Christine has served New York City in so many different capacities and so well. She started as a campaign manager for Tom Quinn for his
91.
In 91, and has since, as you know, gone on to not only serve Chelsea as a city council member, but also to become first female speaker in New York City Council. We're the first female mayor of New York City. And in her tenure as speaker, she has passed and delivered 7 balanced budgets. She's staved off the firing of 4,000 teachers. She has focused her energies on hate crime legislation. She has created tens and tens of thousands of jobs, and really in doing so helped diversify New York City's economy to lessen our dependence on one industry. And on and on and on, and I'll let her speak to that. So without further ado, I'm very proud to introduce and welcome to the firm Christine Quinn.
Thank you, everybody at DLAPiper. That's not that easy to say, actually. And thank you, everybody in your Leadership Alliance and in your Women's Group and your LGBT group and your Diversity Group. And thank you, Heidi and O'Brien and Kara. And Heidi, I just want to thank you to have women leading in corporate life and in law firms and in government. It, like you said, it all together, wherever we're doing it, kind of changes the energy, changes the dynamic. So it is incredibly important, and you make me incredibly proud of the role you've taken and the way you stand up every day, pushing things forward for women and stand up when adversity comes towards you, which we both relate to this week. So thank you very, very, very much. And O'Brien, thank you for O'Brien is somebody who has just dedicated his life to making this city and region, since he thinks Newark is part of New York City, a better place for LGBT people, for young people, and to create greater opportunities. So thank you very much. And thank you all for being with me here today. And I think it's really great when we have opportunities at the places we work to stop and think about things like Women's History Month, or today, in addition to thinking about Women's History Month, to also think about what's happening down at the Supreme Court, which is really just so unbelievable if you think about it. And I've had the great honor to get to know Edie Windsor, and it's just amazing to think that this has happened in the past couple of days and what will happen. But, you know, I was at Monroe College a couple of days earlier in the week, and I spoke to the Women's History Month there event as well, which was great because I wasn't really sure how many people would come. And the entire gym was full, with men and with women, and it was really very exciting to me. And I want to say a little bit tonight, kind of the same things I said there. You know, often people ask me, is it hard doing this as a woman? Did they write that story in the New York Times about you because you're a woman? Would they have written about it as a man? You know, is this tough? And I say the same thing every time. You know, I wake up every morning and I'm a lesbian. I'm a woman. I'm Irish. It's not going to change in the middle of the night. It is, you know, I am who I am. And I don't know if it's harder or if it's not harder. It's the only way I've ever done it. But what I do know is that if I spend a lot of time in my limited brain capacity thinking about if it's harder, I'll have less brain capacity to make sure it isn't harder and that I get around it. And that if I spend a lot of time thinking about how big the obstacle is, then I'll have less brain capacity figuring out how fast and at what angle I have to run to get over the obstacle. Now that doesn't mean, as has been kind of the controversy in the Sheryl Sandberg book follow-up, that doesn't mean there aren't things we should all do collectively in society to make it easier for people and groups who have been less represented, or for people and groups who have been affirmatively discriminated against and held back in society. Of course we should. But then when you ask the question, what can you do yourself? I really do think it's about focusing on how fast you can forge forward and not hold yourself back. Now, one of the things about moving forward, if you're a member of a community that hasn't always been in those positions before, is people will, much to my surprise, but always consistently, people seem to be willing to go out of their way to tell you why you can't do it. When I was running, when I was running for speaker, people would come up to me all the time and they say, you know, you're not going to win. And I'd say, well, thank you. And they'd say, you know, you're from the west side of Manhattan, which is kind of an insult in politics. You're a woman. You're gay. You're too progressive. Again, everything I knew when I woke up that morning. And you're not going to win. So I made a very conscious decision in the speaker's race. And I told the women at Monroe College, I really believe that when you make a conscious decision that relates to your goals, you should say it out loud. You should write it down. You should put it on your bathroom window. You should say it over and over. You should put it in your wallet, wherever it is that will remind you. And I made a conscious decision in the speaker's race not to listen to the naysayers. Instead, to let the people who had votes and power in the process speak for themselves. I decided I would do that. I decided I would develop a plan with my staff. We would stick to that plan. We would work harder than anybody else, because the one thing you can't bear is looking back and thinking if you'd worked a little harder. And we would have fun. And if we did all of that, win or lose, it would have been a worthy effort. I also decided that I wouldn't listen to the external naysayers, which my friend Christine calls not the movers and the shakers, the movers and the drainers. You know them when you look into a cocktail party. That I wouldn't listen to them, and I wouldn't listen to the internal naysayer. Because what happens sometimes in society is all those external naysayers create in each one of us our own internal naysayer. And he or she comes out in those tough moments to tell us we can't do it too. So you have to make a conscious decision to listen to neither one. Now, obviously, had I not made that decision, I wouldn't be speaker. But there's something more important that wouldn't have happened. In deciding to let the people who had vote and power in the speaker's race, I decided I'd let my council members just, vote and decide. But also in the speaker's race, which is different than running for mayor, which I am, so I hope you all write September 10th Democratic primary in your book and don't forget about it. But running for speaker is a little different. And the county leaders are really important. And the Queens County leader, who was then a man by the name of Tom Manton, a former Congress member and former council member, was the most important because his borough votes as a block. So everybody said I would never get Tom. He was an old Irish cop. He voted against the gay rights bill. He would never be for me. Maybe he would, maybe he wouldn't, but I decided to let Tom decide. And the other thing was I liked Tom. He's like half of my family. So you'd go to these events, and you'd hang around, and you'd tell stories, and, it was fun. In 1986, when the gay rights bill came to the city council, he had told people he would vote yes. and he voted no. A priest brought his father to the chambers and sat him in the front row, and he voted no. And a lot of people thought this was a defining thing about Tom. But it actually wasn't. Was a defining thing about him was that he had tremendous guilt over that. And he tried to make up for it in different ways, appointing the first openly gay district leaders and things like that in Queens. So the day Tom told me he was supporting me, I said, I usually call him Congressmember, but I called him Tom. I said, Tom, thank you very much for what you're doing today for me and my family. Because his support was basically equivalent to winning. And he stood up and he looked at me and he said, Chris, will you grant me absolution? And I knew exactly what he meant. And we're both Catholic and he was a very religious man. It's a very powerful thing to say. He wanted me to grant him absolution for having voted against the gay rights bill. And I said to Tom, I don't need to grant you absolution, but if you grant me absolution, I'll grant it to you, and we'll go out and we'll make this city a better place. So if I'd listened to those other people, or to my internal naysayer, I wouldn't be speaker. But worse, this was December, January of 2005, 2006. Tom died in the summer of 2006. So worse even than me not being in this job, Tom wouldn't have had the opportunity to make it right in a way he needed to make it right before he died. And see, when you listen to those other folks, however they're expressing it to you, you don't have any idea the possibility, the potential, the impact that you rob the world of. Because make no mistake about it, each person who tells you as a woman, as a person of color, as an LGBT person, that you can't do it, it's not because they think you can't do it. It's because they think they can't do it. And if you succeed, it only shines a greater light on the fact that they don't have the balls to go out there and do what's needed to succeed. So I would just implore all of us on Women's History Month and on this great day in the Supreme Court to remember that. That whenever we hear somebody tell us we can't, all they're doing is telling us they can't and that they're afraid. And the best way we can help ourselves and actually help them, poor things, is to go out there and do it. And change the dynamic of success. And put more forward motion out there. And that will hopefully help them to get to see that they need to stop listening to their external or internal naysayers. And it's just so great to have events like this where we can all stop for a second and be reminded of that and look back on the women and others who came before us who've made that dynamic possible for so many of us. So thank you all for coming. I'm happy to take any questions that folks have, and thank you all for coming out tonight.